This is a very basic introduction to Sparqlycode. Prerequisite knowledge: Java, Sparkle and RDF, and Apache Jenna. All three are not necessary to benefit from doing the tutorial, but would be useful if you want to actually start doing something after experiencing the tutorial. So what is Sparqlycode? Sparqlycode is a knowledge base built using the W3C's semantic web technology, of which there's plenty of information on the web, and the specifications are also easily accessible. Sparqlycode uses a modeling concept known as RDF and is queryable using a language known as Sparkle. Both are standard recommendations published by the W3C for use with or in a semantic web context. Sparkle and RDF are used by Sparqlycode in a way that's best described as a domain-specific language, or a DSL. So what you can do, it enables you to query Java source code and at the moment Java and its Maven configuration using the Sparkle query language. Sparqlycode from different projects can be easily combined and queried, particularly with your own software Sparqlycode, and from or with other RDF based data sources. Sparqlycode itself is produced by something we call the Sparqlycode engine, and its acronym we pronounce as SKI, and each new release introduces support for more knowledge concepts. The first minimum viable product of SKI was version 0.03, which in the case of Java gives you knowledge similar to what you might expect to see in a project's Java doc. So here's a typical HTML rendering of some Java documentation. So where Java is for people, Sparqlycode is for computers. It enables the querying, linking and reasoning to be automated over the full development lifecycle and its deployment. So where a developer or some other person involved in the development process might want to peruse the Java documentation, here this is not easily digestible in a programmatic way, and Sparkle and RDF are giving us this ability to represent the code in a way that is machine readable. So how do I ask questions of Sparqlycode? So to ask questions of Sparqlycode, as explained before, you use the Sparkle query language. So if we actually get a little bit hands-on here, first of all, to show you Sparkle queries running, we do a couple of simple checks. First of all, I want to check that I have access to the tools that I need. There's a number of choices, as I have said before, but we use the Apache Jenna toolkit. The first tool that I use is Riot. Okay, so we can see here on the path we have Riot in the Apache Jenna 2.11.0 sort of folder. The other tool that we use is ARQ, which actually runs the queries for us in the same place. Now Riot's useful because you can use it to do a quick check of the integrity of a knowledge base. If this throws any sort of errors, it means that the RDF inside the knowledge base has an integrity issue, and you can see no error was reported. Okay, so let's just have a look at some queries. So let's have a look at one of the ones that was in a previous tutorial, which is included with the statistics in a download, or used to produce the statistics in a download. So let's just run the one that is how many fields are generic. So this is the query that I'm going to use. Let's have a look at the content. This is a typical small Sparkle query. We can see here when we look inside the block where the work is being done, we're selecting classes. So this is saying please match anything that is a Java class. With the classes, we're then pulling out the properties that are a Java field. And an important concept I'm introducing is if a field has a property of a Java type parameter, we actually know that's a generic field. That same property is also used on methods, which I'm going to come to in a minute. So if we want to actually run that query, I've got an ARQ that obviously I cooked up earlier. So we'll just run that query. And it comes back and says the number of generic fields across the knowledge base are 298. So in the previous tutorial, when we looked at the statistics in the download, I noticed that the number of classes, which were 388 in this particular project, the number was exactly the same for the number of generic methods. Now, the term generic methods is not named correctly. That actual statistic is the number of methods that have a generic return type. So I need to say that to correct myself from before. So as I say, in the previous tutorial we introduced you to the contents of that statistics.txt file that you get in the Sparqlycode download, and this example project, the Cupid Broker Core, when we had a look at the statistics file, we noted this issue with the classes being equal to the number of generic methods, and that was a bad smell, and I felt I needed to check that out. I had done a check of the query before, but I thought I'd use that as an exercise just to introduce you to a little bit more Sparkle. So let's use Sparkle to do a basic check that the query was correct. So the test isn't exhaustive, but the query has been modified to allow us to check the query logic for one particular class rather than the whole population of the data. So if I actually show you the content of this query, which is investigate generic methods, and I explain this query. So the first thing that you see is the previous example queries had a variable that was a question mark on class, which meant that we were querying effectively over the whole population of the data. This time I'm actually narrowing down the query specifically to one particular class that I know exists in the knowledge base, which is this binding implementation. You can see just by looking at the identifier here, it's beyond the scope of this tutorial really to talk about what this identifier means, but you can see it's representing org Apache Cupid server binding implementation. So what this is doing, it's getting all the methods. It happens to be getting labels as well, but we can ignore those at the moment. Okay, it's then getting, for all the methods, the return, and it's then plucking out the actual type of the return. These two lines here, obviously one is a comment and the other one is an actual pattern in the Sparkle query, but is also commented out. This property is something I mentioned a few seconds ago, the Java type parameter. So in this case, the existence of a Java type parameter on a return type for a method indicates that that return type would be generic. So in this case, in this query, I've actually commented out because I actually want to return just generally the number of methods in this binding implementation class. So let's run a query on that. So it comes back and gives us a result of 28 methods. So that would be 28 methods whether they were returning a generic return type or not. Now if we edit the query, and reintroduce this pattern here that will have the effect of excluding all the methods that do not return a generic type. If I rerun the query, we find that we get 7 methods. So this is just a very quick, simple introduction, but what I'm trying to show here is that there was a query that we used to collect statistics that was over the whole knowledge base, and I know that it uses a technique of discovering generic return types using this property for the return types. And just to make myself feel more comfortable that this technique should be working, we've actually gone and run a Sparkle query over a specific instance of the class in the knowledge base. So, of course, at the moment you know almost nothing about Sparqlycode and how to query it. This is just a very early tutorial, but maybe let's show you a couple of simple queries that help you find out what types of concepts exist in the database. So just before I do that, let's just mention something. So the difference between a database and a knowledge base is that there is an equal, if not greater, emphasis placed on the meaning of the data in a knowledge base. There will be more theoretical tutorials later which will help you understand that difference, but for now we can show you something, just some fundamental queries that enable you to ask about the concepts in the knowledge base that you can subsequently use to actually explore the software and its configuration. So let's see, how about a question, what types of things exist? So the following query finds all things that have an RDF type property, which is a key concept in RDF. Just like a class, it has the concept of a type. In fact, it also has the concept of a class because it's quite an extensible model, and there are other aspects of it that get a little bit more accurate in the modeling. But the very basic type is an RDF type. So notice we limit the results in the queries when I show you them, because if you don't take care in limiting your results, when you're learning Sparkle you can make mistakes and end up getting very large data sets returned. Okay, so if we have a quick look in here, and I've got instances of RDF type as a query, so let's show you that. So here we can see that we've set up a pattern in the Sparkle query here, where not only have we got a variable here, we also have a variable on the right as well. Now the property in the middle here actually represents the concept RDF type, so it is saying here match all the things that have an RDF type of something. So by doing a select distinct, we're able to get a distinct list of all the types that are used by the instances of data in this knowledge base. So let's just quickly run that particular query as well. So these are the types of things that exist in the instance data we have in the knowledge base at the moment. If you're a Java developer, you should recognize, of course, these key type concepts: methods, constructors, classes, fields, interfaces, and enums. So by extension, we can then ask, well, what are all the properties that exist in the knowledge base? But to do that question properly, we probably also want to say, well, which types did they belong to? But I think that's a subject of a subsequent tutorial. So now we'll just run a query that simply tells us what are all the available properties across all types in this knowledge base. So here's the query again. Again, we have a limit on it. This time we're actually making all three matching components in the expression as variables. This is allowing us to pick all the properties that exist between any two entities in the knowledge base, and then using the distinct we can obviously limit them to the non-duplicates, right, or deduplicate. So let's run a query for that. And there we go. Again, I would hope a lot of these things are making sense to you. We've got things like Java types, fields, methods. We have the concept of a line number, okay, constructors, imports, packages, extends, etc. You know, whether things are final, marked as final, whether they're static, methods that are synchronized, etc. There are also a couple of properties in there that won't be familiar to you, and they're also expressed in a different notation. These are actually types that are inherited from RDF, and I'll explain more about those in future tutorials. Okay, so where next? I think the next powerful concept here that we are taking advantage of from RDF and Sparkle is the linking concept. So the next tutorial will be based on linking Sparqlycode knowledge models together and querying across knowledge models.
For further information on Sparqlycode, visit our webpage at www.sparqlycode.com or connect with us on Twitter @Sparqlycode or email us on info@sparqlycode.com. For expertise on semantic web technology in general, visit our webpage at www.intuition.net.